Hello, it is IARESMART, and I last saw this video a while ago. You see, it was a video titled "George Lucas is a Genius," and it had the thumbnail was this picture of George, and he was holding the Baby Yoda. It's a pretty popular photo from the set of The Mandalorian, and it was just pretty cool. But anyway, I saw it on this video, right? And I was thinking, all right, is this just like some meme video, or are they just making fun of George, like, haha, George is a genius, he made the prequels, and the prequels are bad, ha. Like, I thought that's what it was going to be. But I was very surprised, because I found it was this video where George Lucas was giving an inspirational speech, essentially. And it used clips from different Star Wars scenes, and kind of to give context to what he was saying. It was a very impressive video. It was well edited, and I recommend you go watch it, because it's pretty cool. But I also went back and found the original, like, speech that he gave to give, more context to that. It was very interesting, and it's the driving question of this video. Is George Lucas a genius? Now, to give you the short answer, I'm going to tell you, I don't know if he's a genius per se. That's kind of up to you to decide. But I will say, he is definitely a philosopher. Now, where am I going with this? Well, I already made a video a while ago called Obi-Wan is a Stoic, talking about how he, accentuates the ideals of the Stoic philosophy, because I like philosophy. It's really cool. It's really interesting to me. I don't know very much about it, but I know like a little bit. All right, I'm not gonna like talk myself up, say I'm like some philosophy expert. There's a lot of information to know, and I know the bare minimum. But I figured I'd talk about it because I find it interesting, and there's a lot of traits and just things that George Lucas has said that I find really interesting. And I think a lot of stuff he said and as just describes is just good ways to live your life. So we're gonna get into that. I also read this Life magazine. Special edition, whatever. It basically just tells the entire story about George Lucas, which is really cool. It tells like a little bit about his life, how Star Wars came to be, and it's not a very long magazine, but it's just nice. And also it has pictures, so that's cool. Yeah, I love pictures. But yeah, it's just an overall cool article, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there that I think kind of ties into this idea. So let's go back to this video I was talking about. This video is from a speech he gave. I don't know where he gave it. I couldn't find that information, but I also didn't look very hard, so I'm sure I could find it if I looked again. But anyway, he gave a speech, and it was a talk about joy versus pleasure. And I think you might be able to kind of see where I'm going with this, but if you don't, what he talks about is that there's a big difference between what happiness is. There is joy, and there is pleasure. And I can't describe it as well as he describes it, but I'll give you like the short version, so you don't have to go like actually watch that video. But I recommend you do, because he describes it really well. But what he essentially boils it down to is that pleasure is a really temporary thing. It's really quick. Ooh, yeah, I feel really good, but then it doesn't last very long. And then he says it's kind of like a drug. You have to keep doing it over and over again with diminishing results, right? You can never get to that initial peak, right? I believe he said, like, you'll never get to that feeling of, buying your first car again. You can buy like 100 cars, but you'll never reach that feeling of that when you bought your first car. So it's that sort of thing. But joy is a different idea. It's a lasting sort of happiness, It's relationships you make with people and things that are really important, It's achieving a personal goal in your life. Those sort of things. It's something you can call back to, right? Something that sticks with you and lasts. So that's really what he's getting at. And that really stuck with me. And I thought, yeah. I mean, he's just essentially describing the human condition, but in a really nice way. And it's just concise and it makes sense. And it really does kind of tie into Star Wars. So this actually does relate to Star Wars. This is why I'm mentioning it, and why it's, why this is coming from George Lucas and why that's relevant. Because in this video, titled George Lucas is a Genius, what they edited in was clips from Star Wars that related to what he was talking about. When he was talking about pleasure specifically, he showed images of like the Sith and how they are all about power and individual. Like, oh, I'm best. Not like selfish. That's what I was getting at. They're selfish. They want power. They want to be strong and just all on themselves. And they keep doing this, and they don't really get anywhere. That's why they're the evil, dark side, whatever sort of thing. And then the Jedi are more supposed to be about relationships and helping out people and that sort of thing. And obviously the prequels are how they kind of like realize that they're not doing that anymore. And that's a whole like plot of Star Wars. But essentially the idea is like Sith more, seeking pleasure and that sort of thing. Jedi seeking, joy. And that's, that's why he wrote the things the way he wrote them, He wanted to send a message. That's why, That's a big part of writing, and I think a lot of people kind of forget about that. Movies are trying to tell you a message, even if you don't realize it. It's a message of, like, this sort of thing. This is why, he writes the way he does. People always kind of criticize George for his dialogue, but his writing is really good. Actually, there's a couple quotes in here about his writing. He says, when he writes, he just bleeds on the page, I think is the way he described it. It's something that doesn't come naturally to him, is the way he described it, because it's just, it's kind of difficult. He says his first thing he's really good at is directing, but, writing is kind of difficult for him. And I think that's a lot of the reasons people have with the prequels, is that they're kind of messy, and especially the dialogue is just kind of yeesh. But the writing is still, good overall in Star Wars. He had this whole concise idea, even back when he was making Star Wars. Originally, he wanted just that one movie he was making to have the entire original trilogy in it. And as he was making it, he realized, okay, I gotta split this up. So we'll just make this one, and if it works, I guess I can make a couple sequels. And that's how that whole thing sort of went. But again, all this, it's in this. Read this, or read something about George Lucas. I know there's a couple books out on him, and there are probably other places you can find similar information, but this is just cool. I really like this. I don't know if you can still find this magazine. It's from a couple months ago, but it's good. Good stuff here. So what he's getting at is that back to pain and pleasure, right? It's just not pain, joy and pleasure. Pain was another point. I'm going to get to it later, but I want to talk about hedonism. It's this concept you might have heard about, but it's something, the more I learn about it, the more I just hate it. Because the idea with hedonism is, if anything at all makes you happy, you should pursue it. And if anything at all makes you, experience pain or sadness, you should just avoid it and get rid of it. And on the surface, that's like, okay, makes sense. Yeah, do stuff that makes you happy. But it's not a very good way to live your life. And that's, I think, my main problem with hedonism, and people who, accept it. They're just, indulge in whatever they want, do whatever they want, and don't really think about consequences and that sort of thing. And also, you're missing out on some big points, right? So if you just totally avoid pain, you're missing out on the potential of, if you experience a really hard pain, when that pain is gone, usually there's a really incredible feeling of relief. So you can miss out on that feeling by just trying to avoid pain. And if you just only pursue pleasure, a lot of times doing that may cause pain in the future, maybe an even greater pain. So just this idea of just avoid pain and just pursue pleasure is just a really bad way to live your life. And I think that's what George gets at here, that we can go back to how the Sith do that. They try to, if we look at Anakin, he was always trying to avoid this idea, what if Padme dies and the kid dies in childbirth, right? That was what his nightmare was all about. And so he was willing to do pretty much anything to try and avoid that pain. When what we really should have been focused on is actually, helping Padme out and just being a Jedi and that sort of thing. I'm not explaining it very well, right? I realize, but I think you can see what I'm getting at, is that you got to pursue the things that matter, right? Joy. That's what this is about. That's what George is trying to get at. And that's why I think I just love that speech he gives so much. It's quick, it's concise, and he words it way better than I ever could. So again, go watch that video. I'll link the videos I'm talking about in the description, because they're good. So yeah. There's also just a couple quotes in this magazine that I highlighted because they're really good quotes. So I'm going to flip through here, but just some really interesting stuff that kind of makes you go what do you know? The first one here was an interesting fact about George Lucas, which is that when he was really young, he was in a car accident. His car flipped over a ton. This was before he did any sort of filmmaking or anything. He's still just a kid, just brand new car. Came within an inch of his life, essentially. So yeah, George Lucas almost died at a very young age, which is interesting. And what he says about here is that I realized more than anything what a thin thread we hang on in life, he later said. I was in an accident that, in theory, no one could survive. So I was like, well, I'm here. Every day now is an extra day. I've been given an extra day, so I've got to make the most of it. And that's just, again, it's just a really inspirational quote, At any time, that could happen to us, essentially. So it's just a really good way to live your life, I really like the way that he says that. And it's cool. Yeah. Anyway, some other cool stuff. He was really into cars, another thing. That's a big thing. He really likes cars, is something I learned by reading this. So that's cool. Another movie he made before Star Wars was American Graffiti, and it was a big success, and essentially is what allowed him to make Star Wars, because that movie was a success, which is pretty cool. So it's a movie I want to watch. I haven't gotten around to it yet, but I hear it's really good, and it was, a big success, so it must have been. And another quote here that's really cool I highlighted here. Graffiti is about the fact that you have to accept these changes. They were on the horizon, and if you didn't, you had problems. If you try to fight it, you will lose. So yeah, again, this kind of goes into the Stoic philosophy of knowing that bad things are going to happen in your life. So you should simply, not try and stop them from happening, but kind of, prepare and be like, all right, I can't control what's going to happen, but I can control the way I react to them. So that's, I think, what he's getting at here. And this movie was made, you have to think of it in context of the 60s and the 70s, where a lot of stuff was going on. Vietnam, all sorts of, bad things, the whole Nixon scandal. If you don't know much about American history, you probably know what I'm talking about. But yeah, the 60s and 70s were just kind of weird, all right? I didn't live through them, obviously. But yeah. And then another thing here, I believe someone else mentioned it in a previous video, and I can't remember where it was, but someone mentioned how Star Wars was kind of inspired by Vietnam a little bit. And there's actually a quote here that more confirms it, where George Lucas said that, he was referring about Vietnam, he said, "I was interested on the human side of the war, and the fact that here was a great nation with all this technology, which was losing a war to basically tribesmen." So again, he's talking in the context of the Vietnam War, but you can kind of put that in the context of Star Wars. We have the Empire, this big military might, losing a war to this band of rebels who got pretty much nothing. So yeah, it's just another thing that, Vietnam War kind of inspired Star Wars in a way. So yeah, also I think it's worth noting here, George Lucas actually, before he got into film, studied anthropology. I believe I'm pronouncing that right? Yeah, which is a social science studying, humans, essentially, like how humans come to be and that sort of thing. So yeah, this guy isn't just, talking out of his rear end. He actually, has a bit of, he studies just humanity, which is really interesting. And the next quote I got here is another thing that just kind of makes you scratch your head. And it's kind of like, huh, what do you know? So he said, "When I was 10 years old, I asked my mother, if there's only God, why are there so many religions?" He said, "Over the years, I've been pondering this question ever since, and it would seem to me that the conclusion that I've come to is that all religions are true, they just see a different part of the whole picture." So yeah, it's kind of interesting. And I think if you look at the Jedi, which is the religion of Star Wars essentially, it kind of has elements from all sorts of different religions that George has kind of pulled from, which is just, it's interesting, when you kind of see the deeper meaning behind why Star Wars is the way it is. It's really cool. Because if you look at the Jedi, there's the idea of life after death, Force ghosts. This is a common idea in a lot of religions. And I could get into all the little minutia and whatnot, but I think, you look at pretty much any religion, you can probably pick out something that the Jedi is kind of vaguely related to. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm saying that a lot, but this was a really fun read for me, because it's just good reading, and also it's about Star Wars. So what I'm saying is, read more, because you get to learn cool stuff like this, and also watch Star Wars because Star Wars is cool. Oh, look at that! Look at the cast. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, there's a lot of great photos in this. Yeah, and also a couple other fun facts in this. George and pretty much everybody thought that Star Wars was going to fail, and it just was a complete success, Another thing is, he made another movie before Star Wars called THX 11 something. I forget exactly what the name is, but it was essentially this dystopian movie, and it was a real bummer. It did really well at a film festival in college, and that's what kind of got him into making movies. People were like, wow, that's really good. And then he released it a newer version of it and put it in theaters, and it didn't do very well because it was a sad and depressing movie. And so his wife, Marcia Lucas, was like, hey, you should make a happy movie. And he made Star Wars. So there you go. Another fun fact I thought I'd mention here. And yeah, it's just really cool. One last quote I'll leave you with is George Lucas talking about myths and how he believes Star Wars is kind of like a modern myth. He says, myths help you to have your own hero's journey and find your individuality, find your place in the world. So yeah, just another inspirational quote. Hero's journey I've talked about before, but it's essentially You know, Luke Skywalker's journey is kind of like the most basic form of the story, where like a hero gets inspired to go on an adventure, and then they, you know, have a conflict, and they have a resolution, and they, you know, leave, and they have learned something, and they met some new people along the way. It's, you know, it's a storytelling narrative. And yeah, so I don't know, that's all I had for you. I want to talk about George Lucas because he's really cool. All right, so yeah, I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed this. I like to do these kind of videos where I talk about something that I think is really interesting, if that makes sense. I was considering doing a video about the new Kenobi trailer today, but everyone's already done that. Like, I could have done a trailer breakdown, or like a complaining about why the Inquisitor's head isn't big enough. Yeah, I didn't want to get into that though, so whatever. I made this video, and I hope you enjoyed. So if you did, like, comment, and subscribe. Come on, do I even need to say it, people? I know I do, because if I don't say it, people forget about it, and then they don't subscribe, which is really dumb, right? Like, imagine not being subscribed to the IARESMART channel. That'd be so awkward, wouldn't it? It'd be super awkward if you were at the end of this video right now and you weren't subscribed. Jeez, I'd hate being you right now. Anyway, bye. This is the end of the video. Go away.